these murders are now 67 years old.
You've got 2 bodies in 2 trunks, one intact, one cut into pieces.
There's some conspiracy theories about other people being involved in the murder. All right, we're back. We're back in the studio, back cutting another podcast.
Good to be back.
It's great to be back. I love doing this. As I've said before, I like digging into a little bit of Arizona history, and today we're gonna go into the old Wayback Machine.
Way back.
Way back. In fact, October 16th, 1931. That was a big day in Arizona history.
And I was thinking about it. At the time, Arizona wasn't even 20 years old.
Yeah, 1912.
Yeah.
Right? Is that the
Is that
statehood?
fun math? Yeah.
Yeah.
1912. Valentine's Day.
Valentine's Day, 1912. So 1931, in the city of Phoenix, a young lady by the name of Winnie Ruth Judd committed 2 murders. She was convicted. Again, I always jump to the end and say, hey, here's what happened.
Spoiler alert.
But this is a case that has garnered so much attention over the last nearly 100 years. There's a lot of sort of lore that goes on about this, a lot of drama, a lot of speculation, things that occurred as it relates to this case. So like we've done in the past, we're going to dig into this one a little bit. And what I'd like to do is separate what I'll call fact from fiction. Not that we know all of the facts in this case, but we know what facts were presented at her trial. And she did go to trial, and she was convicted. But then there's a lot of facts outside of that record.
Yeah, she has become really famous. I mean, this is part of Arizona history. This actually came up because I was talking to somebody about this podcast that we do, and it was an older lady, and she said, you should talk about Winnie Ruth Judd. Yeah, and so here we are talking about her. And I mean, I just went by her house today, or the house where this incident occurred. It's still there in downtown Phoenix. There's, I guess, a bar that's themed Winnie Ruth Judd. She went by Ruth. So it's a part of Arizona history.
They refer to this case as the trunk murders, right?
And they referred to her as, what was it called? The trunk
murderess.
Trunk murderess.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's do a little bit of background again. For the first part of this, I'd really like to focus on what did the trial court hear, and then we can spend a little bit of time talking about some of the other facts that sort of swirl around in the rumor mill or in, some of these publications. And there have been plays. In fact, there was a puppet play about this murder. Okay. I've never seen it.
That's got to be a first.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Right. So let's talk about the facts of the trial, and then we can kind of dig in a little bit.
And some of the facts that we'll talk about afterwards that didn't necessarily make it into the trial. Obviously, we don't have a recording of this, so it's not perfect. So some of it may have come in. We don't know. Some of it is pretty well established.
Right.
Fact about just kind of the situation. So.
Yeah, and like we did with the baseline killer, because this case is, pretty involved, we want to do this in 2 parts. Today's episode is going to focus on what are the facts, what was presented at trial, and then in the next episode, we're going to get into some of the legal issues that were raised. And again, there you get into this wild stuff. I mean, because it wasn't just the trial. She was convicted, yes, and then later sentenced to the Arizona State Hospital, and then she escaped like 7 times.
It's just wild. And one thing that I would love to do is talk through first how she got caught.
Yeah.
Right. How she first came into contact and just the sensational facts around that. Then walk into the facts of trial on her convictions. Does that sound fair? Basically, I think a good place to start is there was a train going from Phoenix to Los Angeles.
Right.
And at those times you had baggage handlers, right? And these guys would move these big trunks or suitcases or whatever and move them around. You would then go back to them and give them your ticket, and you would get your luggage. There were these 2 talking about these 2 large trunks that were being moved, and they noticed these trunks because they began to smell. terribly
And leak.
a black or red substance.
Right.
And I can't remember the word that he used as far as the smell of it. It was
Not pleasant.
It was bad.
Yeah.
Right? So afterwards, sure enough, Ruth hands them her ticket to get her luggage back, and they tell her, look, we need to take a look at these. I need you to open these.
Appellate court called it an offensive odor.
Offensive. Okay.
Yeah. So they stunk.
They stunk really
Two
bad.
stinky, leaky trunks.
Yeah.
On a train to L.A. She goes to pick them up.
Yeah.
And what happened? You finished the account there.
So they say, you need to open these up. And she goes, sure, certainly. Goes into her purse. I can't find the key.
Yeah. That can't seem to find the key to the leaky trunks.
Yes.
Okay.
But my husband has them. Hey, not a problem. Here's a phone. You can call him. Oh, I can't get a hold of him by phone. I'm going to have to go get him. Well, she takes off and she's gone.
Never comes back.
Yeah.
Right.
So the police come, they open the trunks, and a grisly discovery. Really, really bad. I mean, you've got 2 bodies in 2 trunks, one intact, one cut into pieces.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think the larger of the 2 trunks had the fully stuffed body, and then the smaller of the 2 trunks had a dismembered body, at least most of a dismembered body.
Yeah,
it wasn't all of it.
Yeah, there was actually some of that body in the trunk, or
bigger trunk.
I believe there was also part of a body found in one of the waiting rooms for the women as she had to try to redistribute things in
some of the pieces.
Yeah, to make it fit.
Yeah, and then Miss Judd, or we'll go by Ruth. We'll call her Ruth because I think that's what everybody called her. So Ruth was also traveling with some other bags, and those bags contained what they call them, surgical implements, something like that.
Yeah, like a scalpel.
Yeah.
Also a gun.
25 caliber pistol.
And a couple of empty shell casings
Right.
and a bullet.
Right.
Yeah.
So great start, right? That's how these bodies are discovered. Now, Miss Judd, Ruth, she's arrested about a week later. She was kind of hiding out, I think, in a department store of some type, and eventually arrested and then extradited back to Phoenix. Now, some of the testimony that was presented at trial was the fact that Ruth was married to a man. His name was Dr. William C. Judd. He was a physician. They were a little bit estranged. They were separated at the time of the murder. Again, the murder is October 16th, 1931. She's living apart from her husband. She's living at the address of, 1130 East Brill Street in Phoenix. And then she's friends with 2 other ladies, and these actually are the victims of the murders. Those women live at 2929 North 2nd Street. That's the place that you visited. You drove by.
Yeah, I drove by.
Right. That's where the murders took place.
It's actually a law office now.
Was that right?
Yeah.
Criminal defense attorney?
I don't think so.
Okay. Not somebody that we...
Not a competitor.
Yeah. In any event, these women, and their names are Agnes Ann Leroy. That's the one gal, and then the other one is Hedvig Samuelson, or Sammy.
Yeah,
they called her.
Sammy. And they both worked with her at a medical clinic.
That's right. And there's a bit of a love triangle that's taking place because these 3 women were apparently interested in a gentleman by the name of Jack Halloran. And, he had the attention of these 3 women who I think were in some respect competing for that attention. And the testimony that was presented at trial was that this, they called him a streetcar driver, a streetcar conductor on Indian School traversing 3rd Street testified that either at 9:40 or at 10:25 on October 16th, the defendant, Ruth, boarded his car at 3rd Street at McDowell and was let off at the Thomas Road crossing about 3 blocks from the apartment where the ladies lived, 2929 North 2nd Street. And that returning south, he picked her up at Thomas Road at about 11:25. So you have this hour and a half to potentially 2 hours of time when this conductor says, hey, this gal Ruth, I picked her up, and on my return trip, I dropped her off, and on my return trip, I picked her up. And then you have these 2 neighbors at the 2929 address, living on either side, who said that they heard a couple of gunshots.
And I guess it was a duplex at the time.
Okay.
So I think one of the neighbors actually was in the same building,
Mm-hmm.
in the same home, and then the other one it must have been in a separate building. Now that's like a high-rise apartment building.
So, again, no direct evidence of the murders. We talked extensively last time about direct and circumstantial evidence. This is a great example of circumstantial evidence. You have, a streetcar conductor who places her at the scene, or at least in the area. You have noises that are consistent with gunshots. So Judd is in the area, and you have these, the bodies, of course, are
Later found in possession of the body.
Well,
yeah.
pretty good evidence when you're rolling around in the streetcar or in the train with the bodies, right?
You go to pick them up.
You go to pick them up, and then you skedaddle.
Yeah.
Okay, so a couple other facts that were important that were presented at trial is, remember, these two women worked at the same clinic. Ruth called into the clinic the next day pretending to be Ann Leroy, saying that Ann was not coming into work that day.
Yeah, and I always wonder, so it's basically a nurse testifying to this, saying that Ruth called in pretending to be Ann. I don't know how they
so she
established
must
that.
have recognized the voice or something. Great point. I mean, how do you know? I certainly there wasn't a recording of that, right? She would have had to say, "Well, I heard this person call in, and I recognized that voice to be Ruth
Because I know Ruth from...
because I know Ruth."
Yeah.
Right. So you've covered the issue with the trunks, right?
Yeah, then there was that piece afterwards, right? So the following day, the night of October 17th, there was somebody called, and it looked like this is somebody who would be called to transport luggage from people's home to the train station. So this person was called to do this to the 2929 address, which is presumably where the bodies were at that time, and get a trunk to be taken to Union Station. When he arrived...
One trunk.
Yes, right, one trunk, which is a good catch there, different than what we just talked about. So he arrives and he says, this trunk's way too heavy. He estimated it to be 400 pounds.
400 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. And we don't know the stats of the ladies that were murdered, but
my understanding
could be two bodies.
So, and that one of the trunks ended up being 230 something pounds, and one ended up being like 180 pounds. So, something like that. So then what happened is she said, okay, then just transport this trunk to my sister's house, and she gives the guy her actual address. So he takes the trunk over to her address. Then later, now there are two trunks in order to get those to be transported.
Yeah, so you can kind of see in hindsight the problem. It was too heavy to move two bodies in one trunk. And I'm just guessing. This is just speculation on my part. We know the one body fit in the one trunk, but in the smaller trunk, it probably didn't fit. So she had to cut it up. She's married to a doctor, so maybe he's got the surgical implements necessary to make those cuts. Now, we'll get into this a little bit.
Yeah,
I
we'll wait
suppose.
on that part of it.
But because there's some conspiracy theories about other people being involved in the murder. But what was presented at the trial was that, she's in possession of these two trunks with bodies in them.
Correct.
Okay. As I said earlier, she had some other luggage that was transported with those bodies that included the surgeon's tools, a scalpel, a .25 caliber automatic pistol, empty shells, one lead bullet, and one other piece of evidence that was presented, this by the prosecutors, what they're calling the drain letter. So when Ruth was hiding out in L.A., apparently she was at this department store or some type of shopping place hiding out, and they, after arresting her and discovering that the plumbing had gotten backed up, they dug through the pipes, I suppose, and pulled out this letter. It was a handwritten letter by Ruth claiming to lay out some of the facts of the case, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And they speculate that it was intended to go to her husband.
Right.
I don't know.
Written to him with the idea of explaining what happened. And when we cover the legal portion, we'll talk about why that letter was relevant, because it actually goes into what Ruth later claimed to be elements of self-defense, right? That she somehow acted in self-defense when killing, either one or both of these two gals.
And it was interesting, too, the trial, as we get into it, was really just for the murder of one of the ladies. Do you remember which one?
Yes. Yeah. So the trial that we're talking about was the murder of Agnes Ann Leroy, or Annie, I think is what they called her, or Anne. So Ruth was tried on that case only, and we'll talk more about this in the legal portion of it. But evidence of Sammy's murder also came in as part of that trial.
Kind
we'll
of
talk
another
about
recurring
why.
issue,
We'll talk
legal
about why.
issue that we've talked about.
Yeah, so those are the basic facts. But as we said earlier, there's a lot of other kind of sensationalism and other facts that kind of crept into this.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is really important that a lot of people have focused on, right, is this is a really physical crime. As far as you think through the amount of physical work that it took to cut bodies up, to move them around, to transport them from one container to another, to get them to a train station.
What a mess.
It's a mess, and it's also just a ton of work. Like, it's a lot of, first of all, one of the big things that people talk about is that the reason Ruth was in Phoenix in the first place is that during that time, people would come there if they had certain health issues because it was such a dry climate. She had pneumonia as a child. She had tuberculosis. She was not in good health, generally. Some accounts say that she was 105 pounds.
Yeah, lightweight.
A very small woman. So a lot of people take a look at this and say, no way she could have been the one to just carry out the physical tasks required in this case.
Yeah, and I should also say that Ruth did also have a self-defense wound, she's calling it. And at trial, a couple of things that are important. At trial, the defendant did not take the witness stand, so Ruth did not testify. She presented a defense expert on the issue of insanity, to show that she did not have the mental state to murder, that she didn't understand right from wrong and was incapable of murder. There was that drain letter that was presented.
And we talked about this. Again, we'll get into it more on the legal side. We talked about this previously. When doing a self-defense argument, we had said, I think, in the previous one, that's one of those situations where you got to have your client testify.
Yeah, harken back to our discussion about Harold Fish. Who was on the trail that could testify about what happened, and who can say, this is why I took those actions. This is why I acted, shooting or stabbing or whatever the action is that commits the murder or the homicide. Generally, the defendant, kind of the rule is defendant needs to testify. Now, if there is other evidence that can show without having your client take the stand that this was done in self-defense, great.
And that's what they kind of tried to say. And again, we're getting ahead of ourselves.
No, but these are things that were presented at the trial. And so Ruth did not testify at her trial. The prosecution presented this drain letter. She also claimed, again, that she was shot. It says, also to corroborate the defendant's story that she was shot in the hand during the struggle with Miss Samuelson, 4 witnesses were produced by the defendant who testified that on Saturday, October 17th, they saw the defendant with her left hand in a bandage.
This was really interesting to me, too, because I also just watched and saw some different things on this. I know the Phoenix New Times did a very deep piece on it, and there's really no question that she was shot in the hand. It got infected, and there was actually still the bullet lodged in her hand, and she had to have it removed. So I don't know. There couldn't be any question that she was shot. I think
but you could argue or debate about how she got shot.
Right.
Was it herself? Did she do it?
I heard that's, again, it's not in this record, but there's some indication that that's what the prosecution said, is that afterwards she shot herself in the hand to try to stab her.
And that's not an unheard of tactic. I mean, people oftentimes, to claim later self-defense after the fact, may try to injure themselves or do something to to show that.
That's a pretty serious way to do it.
Yeah. I'm reminded, one of my favorite movies is Fletch. I don't know if you've seen Fletch. I'm reminded of the jail scene where the chief of police, it has Fletch in a jail cell, and he says, it's how we used to do it in the old days, right? I shoot you, I put the gun in your hand, and then I stab myself with the knife. That's how we used to do it in the old days, the sheriff or the chief of police says. So certainly it's a way to sort of cover up a murder by claiming self-defense by self-injuring. At the same time, certainly a bullet like that could come, or a shot like that could come over the struggle, with a weapon, right? Who's to say that there wasn't a struggle with the gun? So yeah, interesting. The other part of it that I think we should comment on is I think there was consistent accounts of this trial kind of being a circus.
Yeah.
And it being in an environment of some police prosecution corruption, right? Like sort of the good old boy days,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about that, if anything?
So yeah, just looking back and learning about this time was really interesting. Phoenix was a small city. It was like less than 50,000 people at the time, but it was kind of an up and coming city. You had these wealthy, men, that it was a very much a man's world at the time. And my understanding and what they talked about was this summer club where they would send their wives and kids up north or to California for the summertime. The men would have to stay behind and work, survive through the hot summers with no air conditioning, in 1930. And they would party, pretty much, and
yeah,
I thought
the Wild West.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too. You think about a trial like this, right, where you've got a woman who there is evidence being presented that she is having an affair, and we didn't mention this, with a married man. Okay, this is a man who was married.
Right.
What kind of prejudice was there to the jury? Also, I mean, I look at this and I hadn't really thought about it, but these instructions, as it walks through some of the jury instructions, always starts with gentlemen. You are to consider. So all the jurors were men,
right?
At the time, for a woman who's accused of being a philanderer or a kind of a loose woman about town, and so just there's all kinds of stuff, but much deeper than that as far as the police kind of looking out for the wealthy man.
Yeah. So trial, I'd say, like you said, is a circus, right? There's probably some elements of corruption. There's probably a little bit of Wild West, and certainly, some element of prejudice against the poor woman who's in the defense chair.
Yeah.
Although, I have to kind of be devil's advocate here. I mean, she did kill 2 people and chop up one body and put it in a case. Now, I get it, right? There is argument that somebody had that somebody helped her do that, but I don't know that is substantiated. Was there any evidence presented to the contrary at the trial?
Not at the trial.
Yeah.
No, yeah, but there was information. Again, we'll get into kind of the legal process where once she was, and this is fascinating because I would love to see the legal mechanism that would not be available today, where she was found guilty, sentenced to death. The sheriff in Pinal County, which is not Maricopa County, so it's 2 separate jurisdictions, he was looking over.
Well, she was housed in Florence prison, right?
Yep, where he somehow initiated a process to determine insanity. So a month before her execution, she's on death row. There is a determination that she is deemed insane and sent to the mental asylum instead of to death row.
Yeah, so let's carry with those facts, right? So in this court opinion from the 30s, following her judgment of conviction for the murder and the imposition of the death penalty, or the order to implement the death penalty, she's convicted. And the court here says judgment affirmed, right? She raises a number of issues. None of those issues are sufficient to carry the day to give her either a different sentence or a new trial.
And that would be our process now.
Right.
Yeah.
And so she then is sentenced or transported, ordered to be on death row in Florence. And what you're saying is after that, she's somehow relieved of her punishment of execution in order to spend her sentence or her days in the state hospital.
Yeah, and that process basically was like another trial, is my understanding, where she did have the opportunity to give her version of the facts. And that's where she talked about Jack Halloran and his involvement, and basically saying that, I guess backing up some of the doubts that people had about, or have had since then, about the cutting up of the bodies, and saying, could she really have been capable of doing something like that? Some people used the term surgical precision as far as what was done. I've also heard contradictory facts to that it wasn't all that
Just a butcher
surgical.
job.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I don't know what that is, but basically a story where he knew everybody. He was kind of a fixer, and he had told her, I'll get this taken care of. You go home.
But then how do you explain the transport of those trunks and her involvement in, the one trunk, the two trunks, and then ending up in LA? The other thing that I don't understand really is, why on earth are you going to ride with the trunks to LA? I mean, if you can get them on a train and ship them to a big city,
Go somewhere else.
go somewhere else.
No, so her piece of that is to say, he said, I'll take care of you. Go to Los Angeles. I have a guy who's going to go there and pick you up, and he's going to take it, and he's going to take care of
But
it.
why go with the bodies? Send the trunks to St. Louis.
You're preaching to the choir, Dave. I would not have traveled with the bodies and tried to pick them up with my claim ticket.
Yeah, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Yeah. So, moving on. So she does end up going to the state hospital, where she doesn't stay there the whole time.
She's kind of, come and go as you please,
right?
Type of a situation. Apparently, she was very popular. It was like a overcrowding type of situation. Everybody was stretched, and everybody talks about how she would do everybody's hair, and people would go out, and I'm talking about the people who work there, like the nurses and the orderly would go out and say, "This is a Winnie Ruth Judd do."
Oh,
yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so she was very popular, and she escaped 7 times. Yeah, is what they say.
One time for 6 years,
almost 7 years. Yeah, so it was like
went to California.
Yeah, was working for a family, my old stomping ground,
Sacramento.
Well, she was more Bay Area is where they got her, kind of Oakland. Working for a family, wealthy family, basically taking care of the matriarch of this family, and they loved her. And apparently, I don't want to get too far ahead of it, but eventually went back and worked for that family.
Because she eventually finished her time at the state hospital and was released. She died when? What year did she die?
1998. Really? I believe. Right.
October 23rd, 1998. You're right.
Nailed it.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah.
So, interesting story.
But it wasn't just kind of like a serve out your sentence and leave.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the way that the order read was, yes, you're being found insane. You got to, serve out time there.
Right.
But if you ever, it's kind of like now where we say you're restorable, is what we call it. Say, if you're ever restored to sanity, we reinstitute your death penalty. She had to then go through the process to have that order changed.
Okay.
And it eventually read to say that she didn't have to serve, it completely wiped out.
Otherwise, you got to act crazy your whole life.
Yeah, and I don't think she was. So that was just a fascinating thing to read about. And then once they got that taken off the table, they really did kind of a court of public opinion appeal to say she served 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
If she had been a normal murderer, and gotten time,
give this woman some
she would have
peace.
been out. Yeah. And again, they had raised all kinds of questions. She actually had, I think, quite a bit of public support by then. So,
yeah. And by the time of her death in 1998, I mean, these murders are now 67 years old, right? Do I have that right? 1931. Anyway, so fascinating story, and there's a lot of kind of lore and historic significance to this these murders. There's a bar downtown that has like a shadow display of the facts of the case. There have been plays written about it. There have been movies and documentaries about it, and so it's something that has really caught the attention of, really, I guess, people interested in Arizona history.
Yeah, and for us, it was really kind of interesting to dive into this. Okay, so you and I decided to do this case. We're like, okay, we're going to pull up some old cases, and kind of just expected it to be totally different, as far as how the legal reasoning went, where things had really changed since then. I mean, a lot of what was going on, and we'll talk about the legalities, I mean, some of it they're laying, it wasn't even in the law yet, but it was what we call common law or case
Mhm.
law.
Mhm.
And they're laying out the exact same elements that we see in the certain defenses right now. It was fun to read kind of what you call the old-timey language,
Yeah,
you
so this,
know?
reading this case kind of reminds me back in the day in law school. So, for anybody who's studied law, or you've been to law school, or you want to know what law school is about, especially your first year when you're learning the basics, you read case after case after case after case. And some of these cases are old. You'll read these opinions from the 1800s,
Some in
or,
England,
yeah.
yeah.
And, for the first little while, it's like, how I got to translate this before I can even understand the legal topics that they're talking about.
Yeah, and that's actually what really caught me.
Sure.
That first year of criminal law, I was like, these are the cases I like reading. They're
Sure,
interesting.
they're interesting, and once you learn to dissect those cases and understand them, and then what you're learning is what they call common law, which is law made through the courts based on cases that those courts have adjudicated and then reviewed on appeal, right? And for the longest time, common law was the law of the land, right? It wasn't until later that everything became statute based, right? So today, if you were to look at the Arizona Criminal Code, it is, codified in Title 13 of the Arizona Revised Statutes. That's where all the crimes are laid out. Previous to that, it was what we call common law offenses, things that were judged to be crimes based on the nature of cases that were adjudicated, right?
Really interesting. And again, to think about the time period, I expected them to be kind of wild on their,
Mhm.
this was the Wild West at the time. It was a
Sure.
very young state. It was the newest state, at the time. And I was just kind of, because there wasn't a lot of case law to draw from at that time. At least that's my perception, because I'm here 80 years later, 70 years later, right? 100 years later,
Almost 100.
95 years.
Obviously, we lawyers
Yeah.
don't do
We don't
math
do it
very
very
well.
well.
I'm questioning, 31 from 98.
Yeah.
And
We
here's
really should have
9.
worked this out ahead of time.
Right. But go ahead.
But yeah, but it was really interesting to see that they were just pulling those same principles,
Mhm.
same law from cases, right?
Yeah.
And this is kind of how American law, you know, developed, and it was kind of fun to see that and compare it, because some of it's different. Some of the ways that we see how we think about capital cases
Mhm.
or sentencing or insanity, and how that gets established. And so that was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good setup and a good stopping point.
Yeah,
Okay,
we'll talk
so
about that.
episode 1, we've covered the facts. We hope you'll come back for episode 2, where we dive into the law and really what happened in her trial to create legal issues that she could say, hey, I need a new trial, or this was done improperly. So we'll look forward to that discussion.